So, it's been a year since Veilguard came out. I want to talk about Origins instead. Hi, I'm Mango. I really like Dragon Age and I wanted to make a scripted video talking about it instead of just more silly edits because I'm desperate to keep this fanbase alive now that the series itself might just be dead in the water.
What? This is how I cope!
I had ideas for making videos ranking all the companions, romances, or my favorite parts of each game, but I figured I should do something smaller for my first big video project. So, since Origins is not only my favorite game in the series, but my favorite game of all time, here we are. Dragon Age Origins ranked from my least favorite to favorite. I'll probably be switching between calling them Prologues for simplicity's sake. And when I say least favorite, I only really mean comparatively, because they're all memorable and do their job well. For those unaware, because who doesn't like listening to someone talk about a game they've never played, Dragon Age Origins has you play through one of 6 prologues, depending on the race and class of the character you make, to give you a thorough look of their place in this newly established fantasy world and show how they get dragged into the game's greater plot. And each one has elements that come back during the main story, not just from the one you played through. The events of all of them still happen off-screen. It adds a ton to replay value and more layers to so many things throughout the game. No real rules for this list, just my own subjective opinions for how good I find the pacing, storyline, characters, and greater impact on the game's full story to be. Also, I'll be referring to each one with both the in-game title and the unique surname it gives your character throughout this. And regardless of whether you care about spoilers for a 16-year-old game, here's your warning. Now let's venture forth! Reminder that I said comparatively. I know this one has a lot of fans, and again, I don't dislike it, but it did take a while to grow on me, and I feel like it falls short in a few ways compared to the others. At first, it felt like a bit of a drag. The pacing was a bit too slow for me, and I found it pretty boring to play through. It's not the longest of the prologues, but it felt longer. There's not much in it that you actually get to do. Walk through woods, fight through ruins, wake up at camp and talk to people if you want to, retread the same path through the woods and ruins that you already took, talk to people at camp again, and it's over. Most of it is doing the same thing a second time, and somehow realizing that suddenly made the prologue feel a lot shorter and emptier compared to the others. But as for those characters though, well, let's start with Tamlin since he's the big important one. And I hate to admit it, but he did take some time to grow on me too. The short amount of time you get to spend with him leaves a very small window to talk to him more and get a bigger read on him. A portion of that dialogue doesn't even come up until near the end of your time with him. I missed all that my first time around, and I was left thinking, sure, his ending is tragic, but what is there to him really? But when I actually did go through that early dialogue and realized how much of a nerd he is, he grew on me real quick. I'm someone who likes to fill in blanks in the backgrounds of minor characters and extrapolate on what we already know to come up with headcanons, and Tamlin is far from the only prologue exclusive character I do this with. So, considering he has the lorekeeper Valisleen, and he admits to sneaking peeks at historical texts the Keeper keeps restricted, it really endeared me to him, and made his curiosity killed the cat story hurt all the more. I can imagine he could have been able to come Haren one day if things had gone different and he'd pursued his thirst for knowledge and desire to share it more as opposed to hunting. At least, assuming what he talks about is actually indicative of an interest in history instead of it just being exposition for first-time players. Also, I know the angle of him having a romantic connection with a female Mahariel is a popular one, but personally I went with a more older brother dynamic with my Mahariel, so I can't speak to the romance as far as what the game itself has for it. As far as the rest of the clan goes, there's unfortunately not much that stands out to me here without taking their DA2 portrayals into account, aside from one character possibly being alluded to in another prologue. I guess I could bring up that it's a bit annoying to have important information about your character's family locked behind a persuasion check this early on, but I suppose the DA2 thing is perfect for leading into another big problem. Possibly the biggest. How little of anything from this prologue comes up again in the main game. We get Ghoul Tamlin at like 3/4 into the game, and that's it. I'm not counting the gauntlet, the endgame, and a few bits of dialogue. I want wholly unique interactions. Let me put it this way. When I've played this game with friends who are playing for the first time, I sometimes recommend pausing at certain points in the main story if they want, and playing through one of the other prologues for the sake of getting context that the one they chose doesn't give. Finding out who Arl Howe is after he first shows up when you're not playing as a Kuzland is a good example. The Dalish prologue, on the other hand, I consider to be the least necessary for that out of all of them. No details from it show up in any other playthrough. Its biggest significance doesn't come into play until the last DLC story and the second game. I guess in that case, it gets points for longevity. Also, I want to note that Tamlin names the wrong clan craftsman earlier in the prologue. So either an earlier draft of the game had Mahariel's clan be the one you visit in the main story, or it's among one of a few dialogue mistakes in this origin that slipped through the cracks.
This looks like a very old human place. Why would they build this?
This prologue just feels a little messy in those ways, like it was a last-minute addition. They didn't change the instances of your Dalish character invoking Andraste or the Maker either. All these downsides are a damn shame, considering the Dalish elves as a concept are an incredibly unique and interesting element of fantasy world-building, and it sucks that our only view into living as one of them, among them yourself, ended up being so underwhelming to me. And since I don't want to end this entry on a sour note like that, here's something I couldn't squeeze in earlier when talking about Tamlin. Considering Meryl mentions that her position as first gets her exclusive history lessons, I can imagine Tamlin wishing he was a mage just for that. Nerd. Welcome to Castle Kuzland, or as I like to call it, Death Flag Central, where no one is safe, not even the children.
Don't worry, son. You'll get to see a sword up close real soon.
And it's all Tim Curry's fault.
How'd you do?
Not beating around the bush, I'm pretty disappointed this origin fell into the trope of the protagonist's family and home only existing to get killed to kick off the plot. It almost makes this prologue feel too short, even though it's already one of the shorter ones. You only get 1 or 2 surface-level conversations per family member and a few castle residents to hint at your dynamics with them before everything gets bulldozed. Sure, you don't need the game to spell out why you'd naturally be attached to your parents and Big Brother, but how much of a read on their characters can we get from that? Sure, your character loves them, but what about you? I almost wonder if the almost rose-tinted perception of this noble family was on purpose, so the players won't think about the things wrong in this world that this family might be complicit in due to their position of privilege and power as one of the last 2 Terraniers in Ferelden. Oh, couldn't be our precious Kuzlands, especially when we have Howe to compare them to. Maybe I'm just being cynical, but still. On that note, your character's status as a high-ranking noble doesn't really affect much, does it? Outside of being able to marry into royalty, Eamon's influence is still all that can get us anywhere in the Landsmeet, again, despite your family holding more power than he does. Feels really underwhelming. Sure, it would be pretty broken if you got to bypass something by pulling rank. But the game also never feels like it emphasizes that you're on the run and shouldn't blow your cover. I guess because the main plotline already has that going on, but that still emphasizes the problem. Nothing changes. Playing as a Kuzland doesn't feel any different during the main game in ways it probably should, outside of mentions of Howe and getting recognized by other nobles. Sure, the cutscene you get of Howe's death rings pretty hollow when you're not playing as the object of his ire, in which it seems like it comes out of nowhere, but that's the exception. You don't even get to bring up what Howe did to your family at the Landsmeet. At least let us follow up on Iona's daughter if you find out about her. She's always there in the Denerim alienage no matter the playthrough, and we can't do anything for her. Does she ever find out her mother is dead? For all that complaining, I should say that the thing that ranks this origin over the Dalish is that the events of this one actually get some kind of main story follow-up, even if it only comes during the last 10th of the game. The fight against Howe is a lot more personal, and Fergus comes back at the very end in a way that definitely isn't abrupt and underwhelming, and there's some longevity with Nathaniel's plotline and awakening, I guess. So what do I actually like about this origin? Mostly a handful of smaller things, but that's still something. Obviously, I'm not apathetic towards the Kuzland family. The game did succeed at getting me attached to them enough that I got inspired to extrapolate some headcanons like I mentioned earlier. I'm a fan of Tim Curry, and I liked seeing him give a more low-key, threatening performance.
Thanks a lot, babe.
I have no reason to complain about getting the dog much earlier, not to mention how it being your childhood dog specifically makes the big guy feel more emotionally significant, and you actually get a monetary reward for saving the one in Ostagar. Getting to fight alongside your mother is neat. And this prologue gets extra base points for giving you a gay romance this early on. And my favorite, How the various castle guards falling one by one in front of you really sells the helplessness of the situation. You're horribly outnumbered. Your efforts to save your men are all for nothing. Even if you manage to save a few, rally as many as you can, they won't make it long, and you have to live with that. It's a lot more personal than the same thing happening at Ostagar. And who else noticed that it's Sir Gilmore and Mother Malol that you first see dead on a rack when you wake up at Fort Dracon only after you finally avenged them? How satisfying really is that revenge when you're left questioning if those victims can really rest in peace when they're still left to rot in a torture chamber? Any downsides to those things? Why is this the only prologue that lets you flirt with Duncan? And only when you're playing as a woman? Being serious though, when it comes to how, I'm beyond sick of character designs telegraphing villainy and untrustworthiness in the exact same way again and again, and I hope I don't need to explain why. I really wish the Family Blade was at a higher stat tier so it could be more usable past early game. And as tense and emotional as the final scene of the prologue is it just a problem with my copy that Bryce's mouth bugs out in the last cutscenes, or is that something that never got fixed? Because it really took me out of the moment my first time through. And going back to being able to marry into royalty, that option really needed more setup when you're playing as a woman. A male Kuzlin gets to discuss the arrangement with Honora, but a female doesn't get the chance to discuss it with Alistair at all, romanced or not, before the end of the Landsmeet just drops it as a surprise last-minute option. Again, really underwhelming. Yeah, this origin is unfortunately a little middling to me, in the way that there's not much that stands out to me as bad outside of some underutilized potential, but all the good parts are smaller details rather than anything stand out. And I wish more things about it stood out to me so I could call it more than just alright. But hey, there's nothing wrong with being alright, Coos. And at least we get more Tim Curry.
Have a lovely day.
Thankfully, we've reached the point in the list where there's going to be a lot less complaining and a lot more gushing from here on out. So how about I start with the closest thing I have to a complaint that isn't really, since I actually find it kind of funny. Every origin has a particular moment where an NPC spouts some world-building exposition for the sake of first-time players that all sound really out of place on repeat playthroughs, since obviously your character would know all that info by now because of lived experience. The most natural ones are Kuzlin and Mahariel assisting in giving some kids a history lesson, but on the other hand there's the speeches that Valendrian gives before your wedding and Gregor's before your harrowing, Jowen explaining what tranquility is, and as I previously mentioned, Tamlin being a huge nerd. And this particular origin has the one I find the funniest in how out of place it is, courtesy of Rika.
Unless you find a way to save us all from Darkspawn and become a paragon. We're pretty much on Barat's leash for life.
Just spelling out the plot, huh? Like, alright, it's a plan! So before I get to the origin itself, let me talk about something that will remain relevant for every origin on the rest of this list. What I consider to be the backbone of dark fantasy and what makes it work. In short, the tone and the emotions it gets out of you. Standard fantasy is built on whimsy and wonder at the spectacle of a magical world, whereas dark fantasies are steeped in dread, fear, and discomfort. For anyone whose impression of dark fantasy is be as bleak, violent, and edgy as humanly possible, I raise the point that endless darkness and hopelessness gets boring. The audience will get desensitized to the shock without a buffer. So, the biggest draw of the genre for me personally is how much more potent feelings of hope and love from the protagonists are in contrast with the surrounding horrors. Endurance, joy, and idealism become cathartic acts of defiance against an uncaring world. Even if that hope gets dashed, the anguish that follows and then recovering again adds to the catharsis. Despite it all, you're still alive. Sure, that up and down is a standard formula in storytelling, but it just hits different when those feelings are rarer than they would be in something more lighthearted. When you start Origins as a dwarf commoner, you start at one of the lowest points anyone in Thedas possibly could. Stuck in poverty because of systemic classism, and you and your sister are being exploited by a sleazy crime lord. You still don't mean shit to the bastard even if you follow his orders to the letter and never talk back. You're seen as less than nothing to the higher castes, even as they expect you to sell your body to them because they allow you no other option for survival, because they believe you don't deserve to exist. The whole thing is uncomfortable. with inescapable lecherousness around every corner, and one petty underhanded deal, macro-aggression, and threat to your being after another. It's miserable. And Dusttown itself is an awfully lonely place, isn't it? It's difficult for any sense of community to develop between people who are all barely scraping by, with nothing to their names and even less to share. Not to mention the bitterness everyone feels over the unfairness of it all, with nothing to take it out on except each other. It's incredibly sad. But by pure luck, you're given the chance to sneak your way into a place of sanctity and honor you'd normally be barred from. Even when it ends badly, you still get the chance to send a message to the higher castes, with the second hardest line in the game, by the way. The laws keeping the casteless down can still be broken and circumvented, and those who don't adhere to the caste system can't be stopped from offering sympathy and recognizing your worth in spite of those within it denying you that. In another stroke of luck, you have the opening to fight your way out of a death sentence and cut down the man who is most directly exploiting you. Before you can even ponder the consequences of killing your boss, you're offered a way out of all of this. Think about it. How difficult and risky would it be for someone to leave Orzammar for good on their own, especially a casteless with no money or resources? You're left without shelter until you make it to the nearest settlement, and who knows how long that takes to travel. You're given the chance to safely take that leap. It's almost too good to be true. Greener pastures await you, but only you. With Rika letting you know she's landed a better living situation and will be alright without you, and Duncan standing up for you in such blatant opposition to caste rules, it almost distracts you from the notion that you're leaving Lesky to pick up the pieces of Barat's murder himself. And when you finally come back, you can't avoid it anymore. It's a complete gamble how many people in the city bother to respect you. It is comforting when you get it, as long as you're not constantly questioning the sincerity. But hey, you're essentially royalty now, even if you still get treated like shit by strangers who don't recognize you as the sibling of a royal concubine, and by your own mother. On that note, let's go over Rika's character and her relationship with Balin for a minute. She finds the idea of living any other way, not being a noble hunter and still being able to feed herself, to be as fantastical as impossible as being given a pumpkin carriage by a fairy godmother. But it's so telling that she's still able to hold on to that ability to dream like that despite her circumstances. And I think it's being caught up in that fantasy that causes her to regard herself and her status as a prince's concubine the way she does. This particular codex letter, the one acknowledgement of her existence outside the dwarf origins, definitely raises an eyebrow. How much of this language is formality? How does Balin want her to talk to him when they're alone? I wish we got to see more of their relationship outside the public eye, or see them interact at all. He sounds pretty doting from what Rika tells us. She becomes an ambassador to the surface post-game, and by the time Inquisition rolls around, Balin has married her and made her queen.
I've heard the statue of Paragon Vraska has finally been unveiled to the public.
It stands in front of the palace. King Balin wants all of Orzammar to venerate his wife's noble house.
The public certainly already sees their relationship going in that direction. Good lord, man, how much of a wife guy are you? Then again, Rika still says she's glad she doesn't have a husband to boss her around in the epilogue if you put Harrimont on the throne and get him to take in her and her son, despite how angry she is at first in the wake of Balin's death. She's still named ambassador no matter who's king, even if it could just be so she can stay in touch with her soon-to-be Paragon sibling. Speaking of which, I can't help but notice how ironic it is that proving your loyalty to your royal brother-in-law requires pulling shady shit not unlike what you already had to do in the Carta. Same old, I guess. And then you return to Dusttown. No matter which king candidate you throw your weight behind, he demands that you wipe out the Carta for the sake of his image. You were already told Jarvia has a bounty on your head, but only now does it sink in that you aren't welcome in your former home anymore. You get jumped practically the moment you set foot there, pretty much no one is willing to talk to you, and the moment you see Lesky again, he sends you into an ambush. And what choice did he have? He was left behind at the Carta's mercy, and no doubt Jarvia wouldn't let him run off to the surface with Barat's blood still on his hands. None of the people you're sent to slaughter had a choice either if they didn't want them and their families to starve to death. How many of them knew you? Who really betrayed who here? And once you've done your king's bidding and destroyed the livelihood of so many castless, the prospect of never being welcome back is solidified. Shunned and feared. But surely, why would you want to come back? You're so much better than this place now, right? It's not like these people were your neighbors who didn't do anything to deserve these conditions. Leaving on this note surely won't exacerbate any sense of homesickness. Out of sight, out of mind, right? This is what I meant when I was talking about the emotional highs and lows of dark fantasy. The pattern of hope, defiance, anguish, and catharsis. And keep it in mind for the rest of the video, because this pain train has no brakes. Anyway, yeah, I can't overstate how devastating this part of the game was the first time around. And even on repeat playthroughs, I'm left dreading having to kill Lesky and the knife twist of the gauntlet all over again. Hey, you know how Morrigan says,
"We have more in common than I thought,"
when she sees how Broska's mother treats them? Do you think Zevron is thinking something similar when he sees what happens between Broska and Lesky? Just a thought. So do I have any actual complaints about this origin, outside of what I mentioned at the start of this entry? Yeah, actually, sorry. First, I know I mentioned how the sleazy, lecherous feeling evoked by the dialogue early in the prologue contributes to its tone, but it's absolutely a matter of your mileage may vary in terms of how unpleasant of an experience a player could find it to be. No shame to anyone who would rather not deal with it at all, regardless of what the story does with it.
I was starting to think I'd have to bust in and get an eyeful of that spicy sister of yours. You must have had a few naughty thoughts yourself, huh?
That makes me uncomfortable!
Second, there's the matter of a potential timeline discrepancy when you return to Orzammar. I'm pretty sure the greater narrative is pushing you to do the Orzammar quest last, considering how no matter when in the playthrough you do come back, you're told it's been a year since you crashed the Proving. But that's only brought up by one NPC, so without that, it's even more jarring that Rika carried a child to term between then and now somehow. Jesus, this game's timeline is out of whack in a lot of places, even up to the second game. The third is something that more so applies to how the game as a whole handled both varieties of Dwarven characters, so I may as well get it out of the way here. Remember how I pointed out that dialogue options invoking Andraste or the Maker and other such ways of implying your character is Andrastian weren't altered when playing as a Dalish elf? Not only do those remain unaltered when playing as a dwarf, there's several other dialogue options that make even less sense coming from a Dwarven character. You could excuse them knowing what Templars are because of the Lyrium trade, but how do you know what an Apostate or Maleficarum are? How do you know anything about the chant or Andrastian beliefs? How do you know who Flemeth is as a folklore figure? Fourth, speaking of inconsistencies, why do the Carta shields have chantry heraldry? And not to mention this bit.
I'm at the assembly. This is no place for a woman.
Finally, because I'm petty, I'm docking points for the devs using the R slur in the toolset to describe this NPC. Look, for anyone disappointed that this origin ranked this low, let me clarify that this and the one at number 3 swapped places at least twice while planning this whole thing out. Hell, I was still going back and forth as I was finishing off the script. There's a lot of thematic similarities between them, so I guess you consider both of them to be sharing these middle 2 slots. But how about we get to why the other won out for me? What origin is up next might be obvious once I say this, but it needs to be said. This next part of the video contains brief discussions of depictions of sexual assault. While nothing graphic is shown, I will give a warning and a timestamp to skip that part when it's coming up. And here's one to skip to the next entry if you'd rather avoid it entirely. With that being said... start off on a lighter note, this origin does such a good job at endearing me to Tabris's family and community, and it's all the more immersive for it. With so many people to talk to and routes to take in those conversations this early on, and in such a short amount of time before things start going wrong. How you feel about the arranged marriage, making up stories for kids, helping neighbors with financial problems, and all the smaller interactions in between. And I will admit, I got attached to the Tabris family a good bit easier than the Kuslins. First because this family has a lot more sad implications about what they've gone through, and because of personal relatability. I have several cousins who I've been close to all my life and watched grow up, So of course I immediately latched onto Soros and Shiani. And the family not getting entirely torn down so soon also gives them points above the Kuzlins. The family starting out so warm and coming out of the conflict shaken but intact. Even if you're leaving, you're still alive. It gives a much stronger sense that this is home. Worth coming back to, worth saving, and has a chance to be saved. No amount of losses can truly break this community. And I think this is the origin that pulls that off the best, as compelling as all the other stories are. That's ultimately the distinction that won Tabris this spot over Broska. Not to mention that assuming you didn't decide to be awful to your family, this is the only origin that gives you a warm welcome back. And how about the prologue's differences depending on the gender of your character? I don't know about you, but this amount of differences made me feel like I was missing out on something if I didn't play both routes. Way more than just getting the option to flirt with a couple other characters. Sure, I am curious about certain alternatives, but you don't usually get to see those differences come to fruition until a while into the main game, and doing a whole new playthrough just to see one new difference doesn't always feel worth it. I appreciate how these differences in the prologue alone feel so substantial. I got fairly attached to Nessiara and Nelaros, and I think it's really unfair that only one of them had to get killed. Seriously, I can't find what Nelaros dying adds to the outcome. Even though you get less time to know them than you got with Tamlin, them being your fiancé and how they genuinely want to make it work with you, yeah, my guy was ready to commit. Though I guess I have to talk about the heavier and more uncomfortable things about this origin now. God, it's still so whiplash-inducing to hear Hawke's voice coming out of someone saying shit this disgusting. And who else gets taken out of the moment by how some of these characters barely emote or move while being harassed, even being stuck smiling? Anyway, this is where the differences between your character's gender really come into play. I almost wondered why there's dialogue exclusive to male Tabris that goes more into just how vile Vaughn is, but I guess a female Tabris doesn't need to hear that extra info when she's living it firsthand. I don't even care about the smaller inconsistencies for the sake of the story's flow. Those only become apparent after playing both routes, rather than detracting from the tension in the moment. And anyone who's never played the female route is missing out on this particular moment.
Haha, Horace was right, she's a scrapper.
Hello?
Oh, look at this, a little elfling with a stolen sword.
Oh, sod.
Cool as hell. And now, I'm gonna talk about the content warning from earlier, so skip here to avoid. Once again, like with the last entry, no shame to anyone who doesn't like playing through this prologue because of this story element. If any given player has a low threshold for how much they can tolerate witnessing depictions of sexual abuse, no matter the story being told, by all means, curate your own experience. That's what content warnings are for, after all. Anyway, I admit, the bar for this isn't particularly high considering some of the worst portrayals of sexual violence out there, but I still find myself surprised that a dark fantasy game from 2009, a setup that I would have expected to produce one of those worst portrayals, actually gave me one of the least exploitative and most emotionally effective portrayals I've ever seen, all because it didn't show any nudity whatsoever and understands that our imaginations will fill in the worst of it for us. No lie, when I first played this prologue and saw Shiani on the ground still fully clothed, I thought we were just in time to save her. But after talking to her, with how shaken she was, I can't describe the dawning horror I experienced while thinking, oh god, we were too late, weren't we? Because, yeah, regardless if we burst in just in time to prevent any intercourse, Shiani was still assaulted, so of course she'd be left this shaken either way. And she talks about it vaguely enough afterwards that it's still ambiguous if it got to that point or not, because it really doesn't matter. Assault is assault. Now, there are a lot of things to be said, and that have been said, about the pattern of female characters getting traumatized or killed for the sake of distressing and motivating the lead character, especially when that lead is male. And my initial impression of thank god they didn't fridge her is put into question by a certain epilogue, despite how she recovers from the incident. And yeah, I can't help but dock points for all that. It just doesn't sit right with me, despite my praises. Not sure how much a female Tabris watching her fiancé get killed evens the playing field, though a couple points do get earned back for the hardest line in the whole game. Alright, content warning segment over. So do I have any complaints about this origin? Not much, but once again I find myself mildly disappointed by how you don't get any follow-up on this prologue until near the end of the game, and that whole quest can be finished inside 20 minutes. Not to mention how only then does your love interest find out about your previous engagement. You'd think it would have come up sooner. And I'm especially disappointed in how only when you're playing as Tabris do you fail to stop Valendrian from getting kidnapped and enslaved, in which your dad is the one getting rescued. Literally, why not both? Because nepotism? And speaking of kidnapping and enslavement, there's the detail that this is the prologue that gives you the greatest capacity for evil. With a handful of uniquely cruel dialogue options, and the chance to suck up to an absolute monster, throw Saurus under the bus, and traffic your own family on 2 separate occasions, I can't think of anything more to say about it than just pointing out that it's possible. But even with those nitpicks, this origin has absolutely earned both its current fan favorite status and the bronze medal for this list. You're a real winner, buddy. Tell the family I said hi. This is the only origin I feel the need to put up a bigger spoiler warning for. And why is that? Well, when I info dumping in a casual conversation about why I love the story of Dragon Age Origins so much, and about the continuity from the prologues into the rest of the game, my favorite example is as follows. During the main story, you head to the dwarven capital city for diplomacy reasons, and find they're in the middle of a succession crisis. Between the late king's youngest son, who supposedly killed his eldest brother and framed the middle child for the crime and had them exiled, and the king's advisor, who the king himself named his successor while on his deathbed, dying from the grief of losing his children, with no other witnesses to hear the declaration. On a first playthrough, it's difficult to figure out who's the most trustworthy in the face of paranoid accusations and threats. Unless you decide to play as a dwarf noble, in which you are that middle child. So remember how I said that when I'm going through the game with a first-timer, I sometimes recommend they intersperse the playthrough with going back to play the other prologues for the sake of context? This one's the big exception. Unless they chose to play Aeducan to begin with, I recommend playing through the Orzammar questline without all this context this Origin gives you. You didn't know shit before, but now it's personal. Taking that into consideration, it's almost hard for me to believe that there was ever a time when I would have ranked this origin near the bottom, on par with Kuzland. I just wasn't too invested in the prologue and thought it took too long to get interesting that first time around, but oh boy did that change. I got progressively more invested in the political intrigue, the drama, and Steve Bloom's buttery voice, on top of how your return to Orzammar shakes out. I definitely consider this origin to have the best main story payoff, with how the entire Orzammar Succession Crisis quest is the follow-up, instead of just one section of it like it is with Broska. But I'm getting ahead of myself. How's the prologue? It certainly feels like it's a bit on the shorter side, but the glimpse we get into dwarven political intrigue before the combat-focused half of the prologue is more than substantive. At best, another noble is trying to ally with you solely to make you look bad for their own benefit, like a bucket of crabs. At worst, it's targeted death threats and murder, sometimes even out in public, or getting killed on someone else's behalf in a duel for their honor. Doesn't matter if the perpetrator gets punished for it in the end, you're still dead. And when you're a potential heir to the throne, you can't even trust your own family with your well-being.
It seems Trian has shown that brothers can't always be trusted.
Incredibly compelling impression. An Orlesian wouldn't last a day in Orzammar. We even get some callbacks to the events of Broska's prologue when they crash the Proving, and Rika gets a cameo at the beginning. And it's really telling from a world-building perspective that she's reduced to an unnamed background NPC now that you're playing as a noble. I admit, taking the initiative to kill Trian yourself is a bit more compelling to me because of the extra dialogue you get out of him, and it's pretty funny that Goran might have foreshadowed it.
This lord did the exact thing I'd planned to do to him, but he did it first.
Also, who thinks it's pretty funny how Steve's voice bleeds into Oghren for a second here?
You treacherous bastard!
And don't worry, I have played through the Gorham romance path in this prologue, and I do have things to say about it. The idea of having such a close relationship with your right-hand man, and actually seeing each other as equals despite the formalities of your social standings, is something I thoroughly enjoy.
I love the kind of woman that can kick my ass.
It makes that last moment together all the more bittersweet, and makes me wish this romance wasn't female exclusive. But when you see him again in Denerim, I'm too distracted by more timeline discrepancies to be disappointed that he's moved on. He's gotten married and is expecting a child in the span of how long? As previously discussed, I understand if the game anticipates you going to Orzammar last, and that can come up again with this origin, but how late does it expect you to go to Denerim for the first time? How long were you unconscious after Ostagar again? Anyway, onto the Prologues finale, where your inventory is completely emptied, healing items included. It only lets you keep the DLC reward items. Everything I collected in the Deep Roads. Gone! You can't sell them! At least you get to keep all your money, but god does this hurt my loot goblin brain. Not docking any points for it though, since I understand it's to sell the vulnerability of your death sentence, and it does that quite well. Especially when my loot goblin instincts take me down an optional turn in which I get ganged up on by deep stalkers and killed because I have no healing items. Unless I get super lucky with a level up full restore in the middle of the fight. At least the game is nice to you by scattering some good equipment about. Assuming you meet the stat requirements to wear them. Before I get to the return to Orzammar, I want to mention a couple things about the rest of the game's story from the perspective of an exiled dwarven royal. Isn't it just hilarious that a completely unrelated betrayal of another king becomes their problem the moment they escape from the same thing happening to them? Not to mention how ridiculous the technicalities of the dispute over Ferelden's throne must sound, considering Orzammar lineages are less about blood ties and more so family names. The notion that Anora doesn't have a legitimate claim to the throne, despite already being queen, just because she's the daughter of a commoner, despite said commoner being raised to noble status before she was even born, must sound so petty. She married into the royal family, that should be the end of that. Now on to Orzammar's succession disputes. Right off the bat, this plotline is significantly more personal than it is with any other origin. You have much more of a reason to want to see it through to the end, outside of needing an authority to follow through on the treaty. And saying this as someone who always sides with Balin when I'm not role-playing a character who wouldn't, I can't decide which route is more thematically rich than the other when playing an Aeducan. The first mission to gain Balin's trust involves returning to the site of Trian's death, and even if you give him the throne he wanted so badly, he couldn't have won it without the person he tried to throw under the bus. Combine that with your character being raised to Paragon status at the end of the story, Balin will never be able to get out from under his older sibling's shadow, even as king. Not to mention what he has to say about how your father secured his own place as heir. Meanwhile, the Harrowmont route offers you more sympathy for getting betrayed, his sympathizers are a lot kinder to you than your former family members are, and then it ends with you having to grapple with the notion that your entire immediate family is dead, and it may as well have been at your hand.
And you could have it all. My empire of dirt.
It is a little contradictory that you still have to prove your loyalty to Harrowmont, but again, getting to skip that first step would be a little unbalanced. So I really like the added layers to this plotline with this origin. However, it ending the way it does in the Harrowmont route does make me wish this origin gave us some insight into what your character's relationship with their brothers was like while growing up before you all turn on each other. It could really add to the tragedy. I know they're both pretty awful, but I still want to see their layers. For example, I think a few things Trian says implies that because several things in his life haven't been playing out as he thinks they should be, according to his rigid adherence to caste roles, it sounds like he's on the verge of an identity crisis. Or maybe that's just me extrapolating again. And once again, I wish we actually got to see Balin interact with Rika for the sake of those layers. Do I have any other complaints? First, and less significantly, there's a different Proving Master in the prologue with the exact same voice actor and nothing that denotes if it's a separate character or a model with a previous design that never got replaced. Second, still not too important unless you look really close, it's mentioned in a couple places that dwarves consider wooden shields disposable compared to metal, which made sense for why castless Carta dwarves used them, but why put them on the guards of the Diamond Quarter? I do use a mod that fixes the latter for the sake of world-building consistency and immersion, but it doesn't replace the one you get with your starting equipment. I doubt an iron buckler like Gorm's would be at all unbalanced for early game. Not to mention the similar reuse of assets that have the Scholar NPC, the King, and Harrowmont in mage robes instead of the several varieties of other clothing in the game, like the clothing Harrowmont is wearing later in the game. I use a mod to fix that too, but if it's in the base game, I'm still discussing it. But the biggest problem I have with this origin is a bit of a combination between issues of the exposition in other prologues and the unfitting dialogue options for dwarven characters. Where the prologue already mentions the caste system, paragons, and Branka in particular, but still gives Aeducan the standard dialogue options for all the non-dwarven origins where they're completely clueless about these things? How do you not know what Deep Stalkers are? You fought them already! Even if it is for the slow players in the back who forgot this stuff on the first run of the prologue, it's probably the biggest hit to immersion out of all of them. But I can overlook all of that because of one thing. One utility factor this origin offers that no other does. Only when playing as an Aeducan does selling items at Gorham's shop yield double the money than it would as any other origin character. That's pretty good, but if you earn the achievement of beating the final boss of the Golems of Umgarak DLC on hard or nightmare difficulty, Aeducan can crack this game's economy in half. For those unaware, the achievement rewards you with the Reaper's Cudgel, in your inventory from the start of the game, but unusable as a weapon without a strength stat of 32. But there's a reason this thing has been nicknamed the Money Stick by some players. Because by default it sells for 339 sovereigns, which increases to 679 when Aeducan sells it to Gorham. Acquiring the best and most expensive items in the game becomes trivial with this. What other origin gives you a leg up like this? No shit it wins this origin a ton of points. How much more can I gush about? I love the prologue, I love the follow-up, its whole premise is my go-to example for pitching the game to other people, and damn, that utility perk. And honestly, the dwarf origins deserve more exposure than they seem to get. Play as dwarves more, you guys. But even with all that, one other won out as my personal favorite. But silver is nothing to sneeze at, your highness. Thanks for reminding me that I still need to watch Succession. Do I even need to bother with pausing before number 1 since there's only one option left? I'm not going to lie, this origin is getting a lot of bias points. It's the one you get by default for playing one out of the 3 class options, and the most fun one at that, at least to me. And of course I'm going to be attached to the one that I chose for my first playthrough. Let me paint you a picture as to how it aced my initial vibe check. Again, outside of this being the origin that you gotta choose if you want to throw fireballs. I played Origins for the first time in mid-2021. Prior to that, my biggest hyperfixation for the last 4 years was Pokemon. Black and White had been my favorite games ever before Origins dethroned it by the end of that year. And for those in the know about those games, the moment I heard the opening monologue talking about how you grew up in a gilded cage surrounded by people dressed in robes and night get-ups and were never allowed outside, my only thought was, oh, and we're really in it now. That was all it took for me to lock in and get attached before even being given the first dialogue prompt. Once you're actually given control for the harrowing, while it's very combat light and dialogue heavy, you're already given so much to chew on. How much of this isn't being affected by your own perception, as the state of the Fade tends to be? Does Mouse really find the circle so detestable, or is he just telling you what you want to hear? Him being a pride demon is right in front of you from the start, the way he's stroking your ego, and those sure aren't apprentice robes. Were all the other spirits you encounter lackeys in his domain, following a script of his design for the sake of testing you? Not to mention how the whole setup gets recontextualized when Alistair tells you what happens during a harrowing on the outside later in the game. You already had a pride demon in your head, and yet you impressed it enough to get it to back down. Once you're back in the real world and get to see everything that Mouse and Duncan's opening narration set up for yourself, good lord, where do I start on how fucked the circle is? Well, the first thing you might notice after getting moved into your new bedroom is there sure are a lot fewer living spaces around for fully fledged mages than there are beds in the apprentice dorms. The harrowing is already known to be fatal among the kids who don't know what they're even in for yet. Taking that together with a few things we learn about the treatment of mages among the general population and even within the circle, yeah, the implications of a high child mortality rate is upsetting enough. Even without the second game clarifying that it's against Chantry law for a harrowed mage to be made tranquil. So with the standard age for harrowings being from the late teens to around 20, this ritual akin to a lobotomy is only going to be performed on children, otherwise the circle is breaking the law. And not to mention that tranquil mages seemingly aren't allowed to go back to their families, even without the threat of unstable magic and possession. The circle just keeps them there for manual labor and making money for them. Why did DA2 not emphasize how that's literally slavery again? Which makes me wonder, how much of this does the general population of Thedas know about? It's implied only noble-born mages get to maintain contact with their families. Do they get told if their kid is being made tranquil? If at all, are they only told after it's already been done? Does the rest of the country find out about annulments? That the family members they've given up to the circle are all dead? Then again, to quote one of my current favorite Dragon Age fanworks, the less outside people know about you, the less they would care if you suffered or died. The worst part about the situation is how, in an era pre-mandated public education, the Circle is probably going to be providing the best education and living conditions any commoner child could possibly get, outside of the Chantry or squiring for nobility. Actually, I think the worst thing is how the Chantry touts that the Circles are the only way to protect mages from the general population, that the Chantry themselves have brainwashed to hate mages, how they enable their Templars to dehumanize, abuse, and look forward to killing them. Again, these are the same people that are going to be put in charge of the safety of children. You can probably tell that I'm quite disappointed that no other game in the series emphasizes the presence of children at the Circles. Sure, some of this information was only elaborated on in the second game, but honestly, once you know about these details, you can't not bring them up when talking about what they were added onto. There's still elements such as how phylacteries somehow aren't considered blood magic, the existence of the Circle's dungeons, and the skeletal remains left in it, and the worst evil of all of those present at the Circle, workplace bureaucracy. But I kinda want to move on for the sake of my sanity, even if I can't help regularly losing my mind over how messed up this all is. Now, before I start covering individual characters, I want to put a little focus on Serana and Amel as protagonists. You might expect points to get docked because they have pretty much no pre-Circle backstory to speak of, outside from a single bit of dialogue where Serana can bring up where they were born, and what the second game added on to Amel's family history. To paraphrase Fawful's minion, those who don't enjoy co-creating their amusement might find that really boring. But there's immense appeal for those of us who do, myself included. This is a role-playing game, after all. You can go any route you want for what their life prior to winding up at the Circle was like, and how they handle their current circumstances.
The possibilities are endless.
Once again, I won't go into what I've come up with for my characters, but I will highlight a particular implication that DA2's Amel backstory gave us. All of Revka Amel's children were mages. How many older siblings had our warden Amel already watched get taken away that they got sent to a Circle in another country rather than elsewhere in the marches? I swear to God, if this document autocorrects Amel to smell one more time! And I can't overstate how much I adore every last fanwork where someone imagines their mage characters and Jowen, Anders, and Karl or Finn as a found family. Warms my heart endlessly. Now for my favorite smaller character interactions before I go on about the big two. This is the prologue that gives us the most time to talk with Duncan, and I love the extra insight it gave us into his views and priorities. Sweeney's situation breaks my heart every time.
Don't forget, you're here forever.
I can't help but be amused by Niall calling non-mages mundanes, though I wish Uldred got the same early game setup that he gets here. I like Owain's take on personhood and dehumanization in the face of tranquility. And as concerning as it is that, of course the Tranquil take no issue with their situation, they are literally physically unable to feel otherwise, the concept of emotionlessness is kind of paradoxical, isn't it? Apathy is an emotion, after all, that someone truly emotionless wouldn't be able to experience. My favorite of these smaller characters, though, is Lily. I have a massive soft spot for her. She's the biggest example of a minor character I've done a lot of extrapolating on. World of Thetis is to thank for that, with what they wrote about her reflecting on the events of the prologue and her state of mind during her time in A&R. I know whirlwind romances rarely ever work out, but it's still so sad when they don't. But again, I won't get into my headcanons here.
You'd know how to evade them. You're clever. Not like me.
Girl, this whole plan was your idea, and we only got this far because of your insider knowledge. Don't sell yourself short. And that's all the minor characters I have anything to say about. Fine. If I'm obligated to bring him up, I'll make it quick. I'm beyond sick of Cullen. He should have remained a footnote about the tragedy and dangers of indoctrination. I don't understand the appeal of shipping him with a female mage protagonist. What we're presented with is far from endearing. Moving on. Now we can move on to the big ones. This time, I'm getting the one I like the least out of the way first. Have you ever noticed how different Irving's introductory quote is in his codex entry, depending on if you're a mage or not? Even if you don't go the route where you get to hear him say it aloud, the game still wants to ensure you know this about him, because you likely would already have at least an inkling to this end of his priorities after being under his tutelage for so long. And this is absolutely not something you want to hear from someone in charge of children. In any other context, I wouldn't be able to blame him for wanting to take the eye for an eye approach when the Templars want to put down one of his students, except for the fact that he wants to implicate someone for trying to prevent that very injustice. Made even worse when it's later revealed that the whole issue was of his own making. Irving had been purposefully baiting apprentices into studying and taking up blood magic, leaving everything they needed to learn for it out in the open to see if they took it, just to get them caught and made tranquil or killed. He jeopardizes the lives of children in his care, and has the audacity to act like he's a victim of circumstance whose hand is being forced. And he tries to rope you, and who knows how many others, into performing the same underhanded setup that he outright calls manipulation. Aren't governing bodies stringing along a fake rebellion to weed out deviancy and exploiting children already common plot points of dystopia fiction? For all the shit he tries to spout about sacrifice, he fails to recognize that it's not a sacrifice if you're not the one giving something up. You're just screwing other people over for your own benefit. Even without Aldred using this scheme to his own ends to recruit anyone smart enough to learn blood magic and not get caught into rebellion, did Irving ever consider the possibility of his trap having the opposite effect from what he intended? That contriving instances of apprentices turning to blood magic could make it out to be a much more frequent problem than it otherwise would be, and cause the Templars to crack down harder? Gregor does seem to be more suspicious of a player who follows Irving's orders than one who genuinely tried to help Jowan escape.
You're not all-knowing, Irving.
So not only could every casualty from Aldred's revolt be reasonably called his fault, we never find out how many apprentices they had set up. And he never pays for any of that. You have to ensure his survival lest the rest of the remaining mages die with him. And none of it ever comes up again. Oh, but he still has to live with the guilt. I'm sure that comforts the dead. Assuming he even feels any guilt at all over anything other than what came of Aldred's involvement. I hate this old bastard. I never thought it would be possible to even get me to dislike a character voiced by Steve Bloom, but here we are. And no, Ogren didn't manage to do that either. But the fact that I hate him doesn't mean this origin loses points. Better to be infuriating, but still leave me with a lot to say, than be boring. I guess now is a good time to bring up that not getting to have a unique conversation with Gregor leaves not much to say about him outside of more conjecture.
Gregor is a weird name.
Other than how I'm not particularly sold on the idea of him being the father of Wynn's child. What we got in World of Thetis just doesn't sound like the attitude we see from him in Origins. I know a good amount of time has passed in between, but I still don't see it. And one more thing about these two. They kind of give me the vibes of an old married couple who have gotten divorced and remarried at least once. I hope I'm not the only one who sees this. And now I get to go on about my favorite character, and it is going to get personal, so buckle in. I present why Jowan, the specialist boy of them all who never did anything wrong, is my favorite minor character. First, another thing that carried over from my Pokemon Brainworms was the conditioned response to immediately get attached to and be ready to die for any character that an RPG plops in front of me and says, "This is your best friend since childhood." Second, there's the fact that I'm just obsessed and fascinated with blood magic as a fictional concept. I read Dead Man Wonderland in middle school and it permanently changed my brain chemistry. As for Jowan himself, I already found him to be an incredibly endearing goober my first time through. Obviously, I could tell he was lying about not practicing blood magic, and my response was pretty much, hell yeah, crimes against the church, and cheering him on at the end. I was so damn happy to see him alive at Redcliffe, and then utterly disappointed there was no way to get him a good ending outside of telling him to fuck off. So after that first playthrough, I looked into the other route of the prologue and the other dialogues you have with him. I found out how he was jealous of your character being a more successful student compared to him, but he didn't want that to get in the way of your friendship. And then I read the entry on him in World of Thetis Volume 2, written from the perspective of Irving. And this excerpt changed everything. Jowan's troubles came from unmet expectation, the perceived distance between should and is. He never achieved things he believed were well within reach. He was disappointed in himself and thought we would be too. We never were. Jesus, if I had a nickel for every time I've seen a character get lobotomized after struggling with academic insecurity, I'd certainly have 2 nickels. This was so relatable to my experience as a neurodivergent kid stuck in American public school that it became legitimately uncomfortable. The experience of feeling like there's an insurmountable gap between the level of success or development that's expected of you at your age and what you're actually capable of. And being so desperate to prove to anyone, even just yourself, that you're capable of something, anything, that you're not completely incompetent, to the point that you're willing to tear yourself apart, neglect your health, and who knows what else. Oh god, don't tell me that Jowan picking up blood magic is analogous to self-harm amidst depression, because I wouldn't be able to take it. Anyway, I feel all that. Hard. I dropped out of school halfway through my senior year, and I was preparing to get a GED when I played Origins for the first time. I had always struggled to manage the standard 7-class workload and often felt inadequate compared to my friends who were in comparatively higher level classes. It took me way longer than it should have to really internalize that my worth as a person wasn't dependent on my academic ability, and not progressing as fast as the majority of students doesn't mean that you failed. Seeing this written like that, despite how much it hurt, I felt seen, in ways very few characters have managed to. I cosplay him for a reason. But honestly, my academic circumstances gradually improving since I first played Origins makes the fact that Jowen can't get a better ending hurt more and more. He deserves better than that. But I'll spare you my conspiracy board of canon divergences and just say, he was supposed to be a full companion, damn it! Oh, and speaking of, the toolset shows that an earlier version of the story had a segment of the Landsmeet portion of the game where you had to get in contact with the Grand Cleric, and you'd find Lily at the Denner Chantry, so we can make guesses as to what Jowen's companion quest would have been. Okay, I'll stop now. But it is because of Jowen's involvement that technically mage protagonists get 2 story quests as a follow-up for their prologue. Or at least 1.5 if Redcliffe only counts once Jowen is brought back to your attention. And that half does offer a lot thanks to this new angle. How willing are you to go to the Circle for help when Jowen is back in the picture? Does Isolde having him tortured affect your willingness to let her die? And can you trust the Templars with the safety of a child who had previously fallen victim to a demon? And of course, the tone of your reunion is very different depending on the route you took in the prologue.
I've been running since I last saw you. I've slept in ditches, in rotten logs, in the rain. I've gone hungry for weeks. I was lost. Utterly alone. You expect me to just forget this happened?
I tried to destroy your reputation, and I would like to apologize. I was being a bad friend, and I'm ashamed of what I have done.
I do wish Jowen got to fight through the castle with us as an uncontrollable NPC if you told him to come along, like he was intended to before that got cut. Unfortunately, the return to the Circle doesn't carry too much of a personal factor, aside from a few changes in dialogue compared to going through the quest as any other Origin. But as far as what doesn't physically change, but gets recontextualized with this Origin, not only is it upsetting enough that now all those corpses littering the halls and abominations running rampant are people you knew and grew up with, it's also morbidly amusing that several Templars were subjected to the same thing that every mage has to go through as a rite of passage and failed miserably.
They caged us like animals, looked for ways to break us. Why should I live when my friends lie dead, their bodies and spirits broken?
Yeah, man. Sounds pretty harrowing, doesn't it? The 2 quests intersecting if you get the Circle to handle Connor's possession already has a leg up on the interest factor, since it gives you the option to take control of Jowen or Irving in the Fade. It's kind of neat to get some extra insight into the magic they specialize in. Though again, having no healing items makes it a little harder. Irving comes with a healing spell, but Jowen doesn't get shit. Are you guys sure you can't count this as going through a harrowing? My biggest problem with this Origin, again, is the expository dialogues in the prologue. This one arguably has the most out of all of them, and the timeline discrepancies related to Jowen's escape. Fast pregnancies are one thing, but nothing compared to this. So he escaped the Circle, got caught somewhere near Redcliffe, got taken to Denerim. Then we have conflicting accounts if it was Loghain himself or one of his men who pardoned him and sent him back to Redcliffe, where he then poisoned Arleman after a few days. And we're told all this happened before the incident at Ostagar. So somehow all that happened in the time it took Duncan to get us from the Circle to Ostagar? And once more, the discrepancies in the Orzammar quest can be mitigated by going back there last, but the game explicitly suggests going to Redcliffe first, which leaves even less time for all that, plus Connor getting possessed and the village getting terrorized for days on end to reasonably have happened. My best guess is the writers realized down the line that Loghain himself couldn't be present for this pre-Ostagar without teleporting, and changed that detail to one of his cronies getting Jowen out on his behalf, but forgot to change every instance of this being mentioned. There's also the smaller problem I mentioned earlier of Uldred getting almost no setup. He gets named once and shows up for barely a few seconds at Ostagar, during which you might not even match his face to the name, or even forget about both of those entirely by the time you return to the Circle. Even getting to have a single exchange with him would have been interesting. Maybe have him mockingly remark that he's surprised that Irving let his teacher's pet outside. None of these problems do much to get in the way of my love for the origin anyway. The amount I've had to say about this origin should be more than enough to get across why it's my favorite, but I still have one last thing to gush about. Yes, even after going on about the characters, the world building, and its story, there's one last factor to my emotional attachment to this specific angle of the game's greater story. Earlier, I said that in dark fantasy worlds, enduring, finding joy and love, and wanting a better world are acts of defiance against the horrors and injustices of that world. And that emotional draw is the exact reason why playing as a mage in Dragon Age Origins hit me so deeply. In Chantry-dominated Thedas, every mage who carves a life for themselves outside the circle, who allows themselves to love others and themselves, they, along with every last person who chooses solidarity over fear, is performing an act of defiance and bravery. Whether you find that love with someone who was raised by the Chantry and came out disillusioned with the Templars, someone more optimistic and welcoming than the rest of the Chantry tends to be, another apostate, the two of you against the world, or someone just looking for an escape out of another gilded cage. It's worth it. It's beautiful. It touches me so deeply like nothing else in this series does. And if that doesn't get across why this whole game is special to me, let alone this origin and the characters I made for it, I don't know what will. And with all of that finally said, thank you for putting up with my passionate info dump about a game I love, and to everyone who helped me whip it into shape. And for all the Origins fans who made it this far, by all means, gush about your favorite Origin in the comments. Maybe there is a detail you really appreciate that I happen to overlook. A list of all the mods I use in my copy of the game that were featured in my footage will be in the description, links included, as well as a playlist of all the music I used in here in order of appearance. Thank you again for watching my first public attempt at a scripted video, and have a good one.